So, can you say it in church? Dare you say it in church? And what if people find out? Because you know they always find out. Somehow they always know. This is the conundrum, the mental conundrum I imagine that Peter's in this moment, because he's gone back to Jerusalem to report what he's been doing. He's been off eating with new members of the community. Paul has been extremely successful in converting the Gentiles. So, Peter wants to be a good pastor, and so he shares a meal with the new people. This is what you do when you're welcoming somebody. It's called hospitality. There's just one problem. He's not supposed to. Not with those people. The newer members of the fellowship aren't Jewish. They don't honor the traditional food laws, any of the purity laws. So suddenly, people were worried about Peter. Everyone knows that's a projection, but they're worried about Peter. Peter, do you know what you're eating? Peter, do you know who cooked that food? To welcome the Gentiles into the fold, Peter has had to cross some lines, break a few rules. And this puts him in a very difficult position. Peter knows that he's not supposed to cross these lines, and that by doing so, he's actually challenging the Jewish identity of his community. It's no small thing. So Peter, again, he goes to Jerusalem to explain himself. In his mind, he has all these different rules, and he knows what the problem is. And he knows that the food laws are not superstition. These are gifts from God for the people of God. This is what distinguishes them as the chosen people. These are good things. These are blessings. They are a generous gift from God. That's how the people understand these rules. That's why it's so hard for them to see past them, to see what Peter's doing at first. And in welcoming another person from a different set of beliefs, it challenges everything. It asks them to change. So what does Peter do? He does what every biblical hero does. He says, but I saw it in a vision. I wish I could do that at council. But guys, I saw it in a vision. I was praying and I went into a deep trance, and we bought Trinity and we turned it into a parking lot. So what does Peter do? He shares his vision. Now at this point, for those of you who are fans of the civil rights movement, I have a dream should start rattling in your head. Martin Luther King. But don't you wish it were that easy? Hey guys, it's okay, I saw it in a dream. It'd be great. But he knows it's not that simple. He knows it. So he finishes his description of his dream with this question. Who am I to hinder God? God's Spirit is hospitable. We all agree on this, he says. So who am I? And he just lets that question sit out there. They don't answer the question. They're in awe. And they shift their positions. In life, we are constantly challenged. Who we are and what we love and what we value, it's challenged. Every community, not just individuals, but every community has boundaries, and these boundaries, be they characteristics or cultural habits, a language perhaps, or political borders, can and will be challenged. And it's a struggle because more often than not, these boundaries are perceived as good things, beneficial things, healthy and needed expressions of the individual or collective ego. And one might think that such expressions of identity, of God's grace in our story this morning from Acts, would be morally and ethically unassailable. How we know ourselves, who God has said we are, this doesn't change, right? They're sacred, right? Peter's not so sure. Peter and his friends are dealing with that classic struggle between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And in this case, it's the Holy Spirit of the law. Peter pulls out the big guns. But then it's these essential letter of the law things, the circumcision of the men and avoiding any food that's been sacrificed to idols. Peter suggests, in his sharing of his vision and this rhetorical question at the end, he suggests that his friends look at the larger picture, the larger pattern, the pattern of God's grace. What we have been given, who we are, is good, certainly, but its true value is in what these things tell us about God and who we are to God, who all people are to God. They've never been intended to inhibit grace, to segregate us from one another, or to create some purity code. Legalism in all its forms is an expression of the desire to inhibit God's grace. Peter gently, seems surprisingly gentle given Peter's usual personality, and he explains the pattern of God's grace. That the Holy Spirit will fall where it will fall, and that people will find a path to life. What we deem sacred becomes holy only when it's broken and given. Our work as God's people is to know the pattern, to recognize it, to live into it, and even challenge the things that would thwart it. But the pattern is not always clear, is it? I mean, in theory, sure, but day to day? Peter and Paul aren't here to share their visions. Jesus himself in our gospel passage says that he has to go away. And so he reminds us to love one another, and that's awesome, wondrous advice, to see God's grace in love, that pattern. But what is the pattern of God's grace? What is the pattern of God's love? How might we recognize it? I have a suggestion. I'd like to suggest this morning that the pattern of God's grace is to be found at the Lord's table. This is a place where the Holy Spirit descends, as Peter says. Jesus' commandment to love happens at the Last Supper. We remember that here. Peter eats with those that some have deemed outside of grace. It's all about the table. The pattern of grace is found in hospitality, in our table manners, in the pattern of the Lord's table. And the pattern is this. We're taken. We're blessed. We're broken. Then we're given. Take, bless, break, and give. That's the pattern of grace. We are taken up, enfolded in the wings of God's love, and we are called together at the table. We are blessed by the Holy Spirit of God, sanctified, forgiven, emboldened to share in the gifts of God, and then we are filled with God's grace and love. Then, like Christ, we are broken. Brokenhearted by poverty, injustice, cruelty, hunger, grief, our own suffering, the suffering of others, and then broken. We are then free free, and are given to the world, to all of creation, to be bearers of God's promised grace and love. Taken, blessed, broken, given. This is the pattern of God's grace. It's the pattern of the life of faith that we've all been called to.